Well, good evening. Is this on? Can you hear me? There we go. Good evening. I don't want you all to think that I'm forgetting for a moment my southern manners. When I met Mr. Pickens, he said, "Call me Boone." So if you'll forgive me, I will do that. Boone, welcome to Charlotte.
Thank you, Danny.
Tell us how you got started in the oil business. You've reached iconic status, but how did it all start?
It has kind of I always think about response to a question. I think, don't make a speech on this question. But I started, I lived in a small town in Oklahoma, Holdenville, southeast of Oklahoma City, 75 miles. And my father was in the oil business, and so, you know, I grew up in the oil business, sort of. And when I went to college, I went to Texas A&M the first year. Believe it or not, I went on a basketball scholarship. It's almost like you trying to convince somebody you went on a basketball scholarship. But it was an interesting year for me, but I went to school and I entered in vet medicine is where I thought I was headed, and I was there a year and they cut me off scholarship. Last year in the 12th Man, it's a magazine that Texas A&M puts out. They had the 10 worst mistakes Texas A&M ever made. And the third one was when they cut Boone Pickens off a $25 a month scholarship. So anyway, I went then to Oklahoma State and tried to play basketball up there, and I didn't make it till Christmas. Before that ended, the assistant coach told me, he said, "You know, Pickens, you can't run fast enough to scatter leaves." And that I thought I can see where I'm going here, but I did. Now, how did I get in the oil business was a question, and this is a kind of a circular route to get to the answer. The answer is that my dad came up to Stillwater, and I was initiated. I'm an SAE, and my dad was an SAE, and he pinned me with his badge. And he said to me, we walked out on the lawn, and he was getting ready to go home back to Texas. We lived in Texas then. And he said, your mother and I have something we want to tell you. Anytime he started off that way, I knew it was damn serious. Your mother and I, because my mother carried a big stick. And he said, we don't think you're on the same schedule we are for you to graduate from college, which was June of 1951. I said, I don't think I am either. And he said, well, we need to get on that schedule because we're still going to stick with June of 51. And I said, what do you say? And he said, either get in engineering or geology and get the hell out of school. And so I went over the next day, and I talked to Dr. Lohman, who was the dean of the engineering school, and sat down and showed him my transcript. It was 2 or 3 days later. I had to get it from the registrar. But anyway, I went over and put it down in front of him, and he looked at it, and he said, looked up at me, and he said, you know, there's not a thing on here that I'm interested in. And I said, how long will it take me to get out in petroleum engineering? He said, I think you better count on 5 years is from here. I said, I can't do it. I got to get out in June of 51. He said, well, you're talking to the wrong guy. So I went over to the dean of geology school, and he looked at it, and you know, geologists are kind of dreamers anyway, you know. I'm a geologist, of course. And so he looked at it, he said, you know, if you did 19 hours one semester, 2 18s in the summer school, we can get you out of here in June of 51. I said, sign me up, pal. And that's how I got the oil business. I came out as a geologist, went to work for Phillips, worked for 3.5 years, went over the fence, and went on my own. And
your stewardship over Mesa Petroleum was legendary. Clearly, I think most folks in America started to hear about Boone Pickens at the time that you were at Mesa, when you started to go after some companies significantly larger than your own. What motivated you to do that? You're a smaller company, and yet you went after a large company.
You know, I wasn't a bad geologist. I was pretty good, but I saw early on that oil and gas was it was very hard to find. And every year it was getting harder and harder to find. Yet I could look over at some of these companies that had a lot of oil and gas reserves, and they were not, it wasn't reflected in the marketplace, the price of their stock. So I thought if there's some way I can get one of those, it'll sure take up a lot of slack on the growth curve. And that was kind of where it all started. There was so much in way of reserves. Like for Gulf Oil, for instance, Gulf Oil hadn't replaced the reserves for 10 years. Their finding cost was astronomical. It was really a poorly managed company. And if there was some way, somehow, we could do something there, I thought we could, and we did. When we first started buying the Gulf stock, it was $33. And at $40 a share, Gulf Oil was $6.5 billion company, market cap. So if you assumed everybody that we did and others that the stock average price was 40, that when they sold out Chevron, it was 80. So the stockholders made $6.5 billion, and that's making money faster than looking for oil and gas. But a point on that, though, when we started Mesa in 1956, we had zero reserves. And when I left Mesa 40 years later, in 1996, we had produced 3 trillion cubic feet of gas and 150 million barrels of oil. And that's not bad, starting with zero.
One of the things that I think most people that own stock in America today owe you a bit of a debt of gratitude, and that you are the father of shareholder value. You kind of set the tone for calling CEOs to task for not enhancing shareholder value, and you view that as their job. I read in some of the stuff I read about you that one of the things that really gets your goat, is that there are CEOs out there that think they're the boss and the shareholders are the employees, and I wanted to get your take on that.
I debated 2 times, and the third time was canceled. One of the members of the Business Roundtable, which is the 200 largest corporations in America, and I always started my part of the debate as to, when I got to ask a question, was, who do you feel owns the company? And it kind of sort of, the collar gets tight real quick, because the answer is very simple. Everybody knows it. The stockholders own the company. But that's not the way a lot of companies in America are operated. They operate them as if the CEO owns the company. And it's kind of to say the shareholders own the company. Well, then my next question was, do you consider yourself to be an employee, or an owner? Employee, you look at it like I'm crazy, and that sort of, it gets the debate going. But the third time they didn't want to debate, because I had the cards. I really truly did. And corporate America today, if managements treated shareholders as owners, instead of, some treat them as a pain in the neck, and some treat them as, investors. They call them investors, and then they talk about stakeholders and things like that. Shareholders own companies. It's that simple. And I did establish in the 80s, when I started with that, and I started United Shareholders Association in 1986, and we got 95% of what we wanted in changes at the SEC in behalf of shareholders. I could not see any reason to continue that. I wanted to be the first association that came on the scene, was successful, and then folded up and didn't try to find another issue to hang around for. And we had 60,000 members at that time in 1992. We said we got what we wanted, and we're packing up, and that's it. And now you've had a whole rebirth, which maybe has started with WorldCom and Enron and some of the disasters that have happened in the last few years. But today, and I think that the CEO of ExxonMobil helped the shareholders' rights movement, and that was to take a compensation package that he did at the conclusion of his career with Exxon. It was insignificant in Exxon's income, but that wasn't it. I mean, he took a package from there as if he had been an entrepreneur that had actually changed the value of Exxon. Exxon could have been run by probably 10 other guys that would have gotten exactly the same results. And when that's the case, you don't get entrepreneurial payoffs at the end of your career. And now you've got Congress talking about it. They're trying to figure it out, which is a disaster for them to try to figure something out. But they want to try to figure out how they can some way have some influence on executive compensation in corporate America. And it's real simple. Everything is in place. The directors should be elected by the shareholders and have oversight on management. And managements can be stockholders, of course, and they'll be one of the owners, but they really are employees is what they are. And the board of directors should direct that. That's why they call them directors. And that hasn't quite happened because boards of directors are usually picked by the CEO of the company.
So do you view excessive executive compensation during a time of decline in the stock price evidence of corporate malfeasance?
Oh, absolutely. I think any time that you take over the company and you're paid to make it go. For instance, the guy with Pfizer, he was there, I think, 5 years, and Pfizer went down 40%, and he left with a retirement of $6 million a year. And that's unusual to me. I mean, when you have that happen to the company's value, I'm not saying that you should not be paid. That's not the case, and you can have bad breaks in the business too. I understand that, but you don't leave with a fat package when the performance hasn't been good.
Let's turn our attention to the state of oil in the world today. One of the things I get asked the most on the radio and TV show, get a lot of Congress people, a lot of people running for Congress, Senate, what have you. They hold up the fact that they think oil has become a geopolitical weapon, and that it's necessary for the United States in order to take the threat that oil poses as a military threat. In order to take that away, we've got to develop alternative sources of fuel. Most of them point towards ethanol. What's your take on all of that?
Okay, you've got to go with alternatives, but let me give you the facts to start with. Is the United States uses 25% of all the oil produced in the world every day. Think about that just a second. They use 25% of 85 million barrels of oil. We use 21 million barrels in the United States. That's oil and products, gasoline and oil. 21 million barrels a day in the United States, and we have less than 5% of the population. The quick answer, and it's not inaccurate, they'll say, well, we're the most industrialized country in the world, so we are entitled to 21 million barrels a day. That may be right or wrong, I don't know, but when you say geopolitical weapon, the one that has the biggest weapon right now is Russia. They and the Saudis are the two largest oil producers at about 10 million barrels a day, each one of them. We produce 5 million barrels a day. Russia is exporting 6 million barrels a day. We're importing 16 million barrels a day. So there's a vast difference between the United States and Russia today as far as energy is concerned. The Saudis, the Russians are the two largest oil producers. They now are, it's a peculiar deal. They are appointing a committee. What's this? Committee to stabilize the oil price. Can you imagine where they'll stabilize it? Right in our neck. But second, the two largest natural gas producers, are Russia again, number one, two, Iran. And they too are negotiating to do something. Who are the two largest importers of oil? United States and China. So here these countries, when you start looking at it, we got a very, very bad hand in this. Alternatives are going to have to be developed. They don't just happen. You've got to do it. And the reason things happen in America is because they have a profit motive in it. People generally would not go out and develop any kind of alternative energy for the good of the country. It just doesn't happen. That isn't life in America. So you're going to see the ethanol, which is not a really good fuel, but it'll work. It has to be subsidized or it won't work. You're going to see wind. You're going to finally see solar. And so I said, why haven't we done this before? Because it didn't make economic sense. You could do it. You could fuel something cheaper than you could. Solar's not cheap. Wind is about the same price per power generation as natural gas, and natural gas is more expensive for power generation than nuclear by far, and second, coal. So natural gas in the power generation business is the most expensive fuel that you use. And so as this all unfolds for us in America, we're going to learn a lot more about fuel. We're going to learn a lot more about what it costs. I believe there's some people that can drive any kind of car they want to and put a trailer on it if they want to. But most of the people are going to start to look at the cost of the fuel and look at the size of the car. And smaller cars are cheaper to operate than larger cars. But when you look at a 16-year-old in America, and I asked today over at Wingate, I said, what is the lowest price you ever remember gasoline being? One of the students had asked me a question, and we had a good dialogue going back and forth. And he said $1.25. A person the same age as that boy in Europe has never seen anything but $4 or $5 gasoline. You know that because you know what the fuel price. So when you say, well, what is Pickens? Where is he headed with this? When I was 16, believe it or not, I worked at Sinclair service station on Hinckley Street in Holdenville and pumped gas for 11 cents a gallon. So I've seen it from 11 cents. That guy standing there this morning had seen it at $1.25, and the kid in Europe had probably seen it at 4 or 5 was the lowest he had seen it. I think that's what we're going to have to come to grips with, is that it's going to be a global price for gasoline. It's a global price today for oil. And the reason it isn't for gasoline is because of taxes. Taxes are greater in Europe. So, okay, well, where you're headed, Pickens, is you want to raise the taxes on gasoline. I think it'd be smart if we did it. If you want to give a balance off someplace else, and I'm not smart enough to figure out where you do that to get lower taxes, to raise taxes on gasoline, but you are sending the signal to the consumer in America that gasoline is cheap, go ahead and use it. And that's not the case.
We did a little television interview earlier, and I asked you where you saw the price of gas, short-term and long-term, and you were very candid. Tell the folks, where do you see it?
Gasoline's going to go up. If you're producing 85 million barrels a day, and I'll do a little offshoot here, but take 85 and multiply it times 365, and that is the amount of oil used in the world every year, which is 30 billion barrels. First thing you want to do is replace what you're using. The last time we replaced what we used in the world was 1985. Over 20 years ago, we haven't replaced what we produced. So we're obviously depleting a resource. That's a finite resource, so where do we go from there? Well, if you can only produce 85 million barrels a day in the world, and the economists are projecting for the fourth quarter of this year, you'll be producing between 86 and 87 million barrels a day will be your demand, not your production. Production's staying at 85, and you now have demand greater than supply. Well, you know the price has got to go up, and you balance the market with the increased price. And that's exactly what I think is going to happen. Price is going to go up. Is it going to be like this? No, it'll go along and look like this when you look at the chart. And next week, the price of gasoline will go down. You say, I knew he was wrong. But give me another week and see what happens, because it moves around. A commodity does. But it's a commodity that has a different type equation. Because I believe the supply is capped. And, when the price of corn goes up, you can raise more corn. And you can keep doing that, and then the price goes down. I don't think that's what we're dealing with on oil.
Are you worried, are you significantly worried about the state of the world today? How do you feel about the terrorist situation, the war, the politics in America, the seeming sense of displeasure that goes around with our government? How do you feel about things?
Well, I don't like the word worry, because when asked about worrying, I always say I never worry, but I become concerned. So maybe that's a fine line between worry and concern. But the terrorist is something we've never seen before. And maybe I'm getting negative that I'm not sure that we never get rid of them. I mean, they're very dangerous, as we know, and cockroaches are not. But cockroaches you can't get rid of. I don't care how hard you try and how much poison you put out, you still got them. And I'm afraid we're going to end up with terrorists forever after. Now, can we contain them? Yes, I think we can. But I think that's got to be the biggest threat that this country has today. Politics, I guess easy way to say it is that we don't have enough Jesse Helms. And it's... I knew Senator Helms from the start, 72, I believe, but I supported him for the right reasons and always admired him for the fact that he had a tough hide. Boy, he'd stay in there and keep after it. He didn't back down to anybody. And we don't have enough of those. And, you say, well, there are some people coming up. And that's probably true. I mean, we haven't seen the last of somebody that was as good as Senator Helms. But I don't know whether we have enough of them coming up to do it. At the same time, the Republicans get knocked out in the last midterm election. For what reason? Because we deserved it. That's what happened. We deserved it. We didn't do anything. We didn't deserve to be put back in. Well, they say, well, gosh, the other people they're worse than we are. Yeah, but they don't know that. There's a lot of voters out there don't know that they're worse than we are. And maybe they'll figure that out by the next election or the next election. We'll get back in. We know we will. But politics is a terrible game, as you all know. And that's the best decision I ever made was in 1986 and 1990 when I seriously considered running for governor of Texas that I didn't run. That was really a good call on my part.
Before I open the floor for questions, I did want to ask you what you think the most significant challenges are facing Americans today. What do you see as the things we need to be most concerned about?
I think are you talking about individually, for me in Dallas, Texas, getting up every morning, the terrorists are not I don't consider the terrorists to be a threat directly at me. And the reason I feel that way is that if I'd have been in New York, the 9/11, I'm sure that I would feel maybe different about that. But I was there 2 weeks later, and Mayor Giuliani took me down to Ground Zero, and I wanted to see it. And it was absolutely, we all know it was unbelievable for this country to take a hit like that. And so terrorist activity isn't something I get up and think about the first thing in the morning. We've got a good economy. We've come down a little bit, but I think we're going to have a decent year. But it seems like everybody that wants to is doing pretty well. That there are jobs there. We have and I think the country, if you could make a few adjustments here and there, that it's about as good as it can get for us in this country, our standard of living and everything else. And that's what Madeline said today, when we go to different places around the country, and we hadn't been in North Carolina, and we were on the highway, and she said, everybody here seems to be doing well. And I think that's kind of it. But
there are hot spots around the world. Iran, for example, they've got a guy over there who, to us, seems nuts. He may have the ability to develop nuclear weapons. The president has said the biggest danger to the country is nuclear proliferation. North Korea is run by a megalomaniacal kind of a guy. Hugo Chavez getting his hands on oil, political weapon. And of course the ideological battle between Islam and Christianity. None of that, you feel like we're
oh yeah, I think I agree with you 100%. All those are problems for it, but it's not something that I have to deal with every morning. I see it. It concerns me. There isn't anything I can do about it. I'm not in a position to make a decision and don't have the facts to help anybody, and nobody asked me either.
Just so
one thing, watch every one of these candidates. I've got rabbit ears on this one, and I don't think other people are as sensitive to it as I am. But watch every one of these candidates running for president. this country is going to be energy independent. You heard them say that? They've been saying it for 30 years. 30 years. 30 years ago, we were importing 23% of the oil for this country, and today we're importing 60%. Not a one of them has been right. Not a one of them has been close to being right. Not a one of them has really addressed the problem seriously. We have never had an energy plan for America. We never have. Now you say, well, 1978, that President Carter passed the Fuel Use Act, and well, yeah, you've had some things passed, but a serious energy plan, no. Never had one.
Boone, they discovered, did they not, in the Gulf of Mexico, some kind of a reserve that was supposedly, it was reported that it was going to produce 1 million barrels of oil a day. Was there truth to that? Why aren't they bringing that up?
Well, there's one word that I want to go back. They reported. There's all kinds of things that are reported on the oil industry. 1 million barrels a day is nothing. I mean, that's 5% of what we use every day in the United States. You know, the other day I was with a senator, and we were talking, and he was asking me some questions. So I was flattered that he would want to ask me questions about something. And it was about the oil industry. He said, "Well, can't we solve our problem in Alaska?" I thought, I can't believe the question. I cannot believe it. The pipeline in Alaska will transport 2 million barrels a day. That's all it'll transport. So if you opened up the Arctic Wildlife Refuge and water, if you opened that up and you were very, very successful on it, the pipeline is now producing 700,000 barrels a day on production that was found 30 years ago. And it's gone down from 2 million to 700,000 barrels. Okay, now we have this new discovery, and we've got we still can't get 2 million barrels in the pipeline. That's 10% of what the United States uses every day. So you can't solve the problem from the North Slope, but you're not going to find anything more than to fill that line. It's not going to be like you have 4 million barrels of production a day and you only have 2 million line capacity. Wipe that out. That isn't going to happen.
Folks, we've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm going to open it up to 1 or 2 questions from the floor. Let's take you first.
I was reading an investment daily the other day that talked about Carter's energy policy. It's the only one that had what a disaster that was. But I was reading that Hillary Clinton is adopting Carter's energy policy for her campaign. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, the question is that Hillary was talking about adopting Carter's energy plan, which was not much of a plan, and for her campaign. But I heard Hillary give her energy plan, and it was one of those kind of things I would never see where Hillary was going to speak and want to listen to her. It was. You were flipping across the channels, and there was Hillary talking about energy. So I watched her, and I started to listen, and a lot of the things she said weren't stupid, but till she got to the end. And at the end, she had a plan for how we were going to pay for it. Tax the oil companies, of course. That's easy. That is not smart, I can tell you. And I have no oil company now, and I pay a lot of taxes, but not from oil and gas production. But you don't want to, that's not the place to do it, because right now the industry is not investing enough money back into the industry to solve the problem. And you don't want to take the money away from it. But that gets back to stockholders, and Danny's hurrying me on. Okay,
yeah.
Go.
Use the microphone so the whole room can hear you.
Thank you for coming to Charlotte. Can you comment briefly on the prevalence of private equity group investments in company going private, transactions, hedge fund activism? That's obviously a big topic for us here in Charlotte because the banks are involved either defending against such attacks or helping to facilitate transactions involving pegs and hedge funds.
Wait just a second. Explain that. What tax? You said
Well,
something about tax.
No, not a tax as in taxation, but a TAC.
Okay,
If an
a TAC,
activist
okay.
hedge fund comes in and...
I got it. I got the question.
Thank you.
Has everybody else here? Okay. The private equity has come in, and we all know, and you pick up the Wall Street Journal every day, and there's more private equity than we ever imagined. Where's all this money coming from? Everybody has it, and then you have KKR has made a recent offer for TXU, the big utility in Texas, for $44 billion. Now, I don't know about you, but that's real money, $44 billion. I never saw a deal like that. Gulf Oil in 1984 was $13 billion, and that was the biggest transaction of a takeover or anything else. And I didn't do that. Chevron bought Gulf, but I think we caused it to happen. But that was huge at the time. Now you're up to $44 billion for TXU. The reason I think all of that is happening is because public companies are in the marketplace are valued less than the value of the assets. That arbitrage causes private equity to have a place. So, for instance, there's no way KKR is going to pay $44 billion for TXU unless they can make $10 or $20 billion out of it. They're going to take a little time and a little work to get there, but they're going to make money out of it. Who is the loser? Really, as I see it, there may not be a loser. The shareholder sure isn't the loser. The consumer, questionable, but Texas has the second highest cost per power to any other state in the United States, New York being the highest. Then the reason Texas cost of power is so high is because they went to natural gas away from coal. And when that happened, they should have had more nuclear plants, but they went to natural gas at a time that natural gas was cheap. Then the price went up, and now the cost of power is high. Private equity has got, every time they look at those companies that are selling below the value of the assets, and it'll be in TXU, it's a utility, and consequently the bureaucracy is too great. There'll be a lot of people in TXU that won't survive. They'll have another place to go. There'll be money made. It'll look pretty good idea is what it looks like. But the only reason that those opportunities exist is because the market price of stock is substantially below the value of the company.
Folks, Boone he'd stay here all night and talk, and I'm not going to let him. We can't.
You don't want to stay. I do.
That's not it. I know he has to go to, he was at a dinner last night, and he's with us tonight, and they have to leave. Mr. and Mrs. Pickens are leaving right away, right as soon as we conclude here, because he has to be on CNBC in the morning up in Washington, I believe.
Early.
So you all help me thank him for a wonderful, wonderful evening.
Thank you. You're great. We can go on the road. Hey, how about this? Thank you. Thank you.